Alrighty, so for 5.1 in our week 5, we're going to implement local storage. At the end of week 4, we set up the entry that is a combination, as we saw, of our form inputs and our calculated results, and to one object literal, and we also included a timestamp. So that particular object, and at this point I've cleaned up my console logs, which I want you to do as well, to only have the entry listed. And the reason I want that is because that's what we're going to talk about today. We're going to talk about and start implementing something to make what is now in memory, right? So volatile, meaning if the computer, of course, gets rebooted, of course, but also if you just refresh the page, these entries in this global array of carbon footprint entries is going to disappear, okay? And for any kind of app, there's a certain amount of persistence that you want. Now, what we're doing is we're going to use something that comes from the browser's API or its built-in infrastructure. But you can lend this, in a sense, you can think of this anytime just to be analogous, meaning similar as wanting to store something for longer term. Now, typically, if you're developing for real-world applications, you're using the cloud somehow because there's so many cloud services. But for us, this is really just an experience in learning how to first implement and then why you would want to implement something like a persistent data store. Okay, so we're going to use this idea of local storage. And it's a read-only property of the window interface. That's basically looking at the document that I've shown you before. When we're referencing the doc, we are referencing the entire document, and then the window is a part of that. And so this feature is built in there, okay? And this is what you'll see becomes important because there is something called session storage, which is if you're logged in something, it manages those sessions. That has an expiration date. This does not, okay? But it also has some other downsides, but in that sense we're going to work around them. There is some security issues. Again, you wouldn't use something like what we're going to do here for a longer term basis. Okay, and here's the key, is that everything we store in there becomes strings. So I'm going to first show you this, and then we'll talk about how we handle converting things into the data structures that we want. Okay, so over in our week 5 folder, I've already copied in all the files. I've created a storage. Matter of fact, that's what we're doing today. I've created the storage.js file. Okay, so we're going to have this be a module, which again makes sense, right? Because from really what we've learned, the patterns we're learning is you create modules for specific pieces of functionality that that don't need to be in the app.js, that make more sense to have its own module. So in this case, storage would definitely match that. So in the app.js, looks like I have not done this part, so I'll do this where I go up in here. Okay, so I'll put it here because I got rid of my other ones. Okay, I probably needed to minimize. By the time you got here, I've probably gone through attendance and done even more summarization of the comments. We'll do storage from, okay, quote, storage. Okay, so now we have set up our reference in the app, and we'll come over to storage, and I've already put in a couple of the comments here. So now we're going to save entries to local storage after submission so that they're persistent. This module will handle all the interactions with our carbon footprint entries. And it's a unique identifier. So let's actually do this piece here because this kind of points out a couple things we've kind of referred to, but it's a good to talk about. So I'm going to set up, in this case, and you will as well, a variable, okay? A global variable. And in this case, for the style that we're using, it's different. Okay, we're going to call it carbon footprint entries. Okay, so this is what we call screaming snake case, something I did not know about that I researched, but it's a naming convention. Okay, so why would we use something like this where in app.js we use the carbon footprint as a typical camel case, right? Lower, upper, upper. So that's your camel case that I have mentioned, we've talked about a little bit, but that's a naming standard that for this and really for most programming in JavaScript, but also other languages. But in this case, we're using screaming snake case because, and this is what the distinction is that reserved for global constants whose value never changes through the life of the application. So in other words, once this is set, it does not change. And the contrast is on carbon footprint where we set up an array literal. But what happens is we update its value, internal value, not the variable. We don't declare the variable again because we can't with const, but we update the internal data structure over time, where here we do not. And that's what is important because you will see that standard in other programming languages like Python, which I absolutely love programming in Python as well. Okay? Now, where this is going to live in the browser, I'm going to show you now. So if you come, like we've been in Elements, Console, Sources. Sources is typically where I land most all the time. But if you go over Network Performance Memory, go to Application, you will see our live server instance here. Okay, so this is your local store. So right now there's nothing in here. But we're about to write some code that will store something in here, and I just want you to know where to find it. Okay, so back in our code now. So what we're going to do here is we're going to call that API, which is application interface. So basically this is just something built into the browser that we can already use called local storage, right? And we're going to do something, there's a method called setItem. And typically on local storage, and let's see if they talk about this, there's really only a couple of methods: setItem, getItem, removeItem, and clear. So there's not a lot of things we do with local storage as far as the methods, the functions that we use. And you'll see this in a minute. So we're going to set an item. And the setting of the item will open and close our parentheses. So we're calling, again, a method. It is just a function. And what we want to give it is what's the key. Well, in this case, we've already set up a particular key. So I'll reference that. Okay, so now what do you want to store in here? Okay, and this is where you can store all kinds of different things into here. Okay, so as an example, okay, store your name. All right, so now that we have that, it's like, okay, so let's actually go see this. Now, by the way, where I'm writing this code is on the global scope under storage, which means it's just going to load when the file itself loads. As a matter of fact, you can already see here, because of the live reload, it has already run and set that variable. Okay, or set that value. So here's your key. And again, you can think of this like objects in a sense. It's got a key and it's got a value. The difference is if I refresh, right, and if I do this, if I close the tab and reopen the tab, okay, come back here, application, it still exists, which is unlike, well, which is what we're looking for in functionality. Okay, so typically things go away. We want things to hang out so that we can then, based on the submissions here, render back that data. Okay, so let's go back to our code. So now we know how to store something in local storage, and I'm going to use that fun little, do another line. But let's say in here I put, a number, okay, an integer, a whole number. Well, notice what happens. Anytime you do set item, whatever you're setting overwrites what was in there before. So you're generally setting an item, retrieving an item. Okay, the last set is going to be whatever this is, so it overwrites what's in there. Again, there's not a lot of methods here, but that's mostly what you're doing. Okay, so the pairing of this would be to get an item from local storage, and to do that, we're actually going to set up local store, and I'm just going to set up a variable here. Okay, value. And in this case, we're going to say get. Okay, sorry. First, I have to do local storage dot get item. Okay. Now I have to tell it where is that key. Okay, it's that key right there. Okay. So if I do this, then and let's just do console log local store value so that we can see it. Okay. Cool. Surprise it. Oh, there it is, right there. Okay, so it's like, okay, so it gives me the value back so I can use it, because your code can't necessarily reference directly what's in here. It has to use this idea of getting something out of it and storing it in a local variable in order for you to use that content. But what's really important to understand is this concept here, which let's actually set up a template string so we can see this. Okay, and in this case, we in the early part of this class learned something called type of. Okay, trying to see where I see I missed my. Okay, so we're going to say, hey, what is that value? Because we know, right? So let's do this. Let's actually comment out this one. Okay, so it already ran. And it showed it's a string, which it is a string when we stored it. But look what happens when we do a number. Okay. As a matter of fact, let's just go ahead and say also, just so you can see this in here, right? So we'll say local store value. Okay. So local store value, and just kind of delineate between these two, is a string, but we know it is a number. And so this is the important thing to understand about the way that we use local storage, is we have to know that the way it's stored and the way we get it. So we set it and we get it back. But no matter what we put, no matter what kind of primitive or data type we put in, it's going to give us a string back. And I mean literally any. So if I do that same trick again, and let's say here, right, I'm just keeping these in here so we can play with them. Let's say I set up an array. Okay, let's say it was 1, 2, and 3. Okay, so an array length of 3 has individual items in it. Okay, so our local store value, as a matter of fact, in here, let's also put not only the actual type of, but also so look at this, it's a string, right? It's 1, 2, 3, but we know it as an array, but that doesn't matter. And this is the point of me showing you this, because what we're about to do is write some code that's actually going to help us manage this. But we're going to do one more example, okay? Because this time I want to actually show you, not there, right here at the beginning. Because this is going to also be true for the thing we've been looking at. So we have a object literal. Okay, so let's say name. Okay, right, and we could do multiple key values here. Now that's stored as an object, but when it comes out, it's still a string. Okay, so hopefully I've nailed, hopefully you have that now, is that yes, this is great. We actually need to do a little more work in order to handle this particular feature that we're going to lean into. So in this case, we're going to get introduced to a new thing that we haven't seen in this course yet. So let's actually just see it in action and then we'll talk about it. Okay. So in here, when we're actually going to set the item, okay, so when we're going to set the item itself, we're going to do something, and let's actually just, I think, no, we'll just do it here. We'll do it and then we'll talk about it, okay? So after we specify, because in here is the key, right? And in here where we set the item, we just give it the name of whatever it is. Well, one of the things we need to do as it's going in, okay, as it's being set, we need to say JSON, okay, JavaScript object notation, that's what that means, dot stringify. Okay, so we're going to stringify, which is a method, so we're going to say in our parentheses here, whatever we're giving to you, right, you're going to stringify this. Now, this stringify has an accompanying parse that we'll use, okay? So, but just for a second, matter of fact, do we have, does it give me the MDN reference here? Yeah, okay, converts a JavaScript object into JavaScript object notation. Now, this JSON, if you're around for any length of time, you're going to hear JSON because it's used in so many ways. Like, as a matter of fact, if you're going out and calling what we call an API, which you will learn later in this class, the way the data is transformed is transferred format-wise is to JSON. So JSON is something very, very commonly used in JavaScript, right? It's a standard that's built around the JavaScript language, but other languages use it as well. But you can see that in here we're calling JSON and we're saying, hey, stringify this, and you'll see what this does. Okay, so now by calling stringify, look what happens here is at least on the object we got, instead of it's still a string, but now we are stringifying it when it goes in. And the reason we want to do that is we're going to use the accompanying here when we get it out. And so when we get it out, we're actually going to call the get item with the key as well. Okay, but now we want to call, now this is, and the reason I'm showing it this way is we're going to call JSON.parse. Okay, so this is a method just like this. Okay, and in this case where we have called it on the value that's coming in, now we're saying, hey, when you get that item, what comes back, we want you to parse it. Okay, so now when we parse it, now what we can see here is, and this might not be clear when you're looking at it because of this hole, and we've seen this object reference. But in this case, it is coming back now as an object, and an object something we know how to deal with in JavaScript, and we want to be able to deal with it for our entries, right? Is that form data, that resulting, that new entry object literal is what we need to be able to, that's the data structure our app, and really many apps want to use. But just to kind of bring this home, right? This is now going to fix the issue, okay? Uh-oh. What happened? Set item. Let's see what the issue was. Parse non-white spaces. Oh, it seems like the array, the way I have it. Hold on, let me look at this. Oh, that's funny. I love that. So what I forgot to do was this, right? I was like, why is that erroring? It's because when I wrote this code, I did not include the stringify. So, you know, this is also just part of coding. It's like, especially when you're playing around, you just have to think about, like, okay, what am I doing? So in this case, what I did is I missed the stringify. So I'm just going to take my array here, copy it into this one just so you can see the idea. Okay, because And let's just look at this. So this is, and by the way, this is a really good way to do this. It's like go over and ask what the error is, and this is where the LLMs are really helpful. Now, I think I would have found it, but it's nice to have that to look at. Okay, so now the storage is local storage is an object. Okay, now you might wonder, well, that's an array. Actually, what happens you'll learn in JavaScript is almost everything's an object, even an array. Okay, but the idea is that when we use the stringify combined with parse, so when it goes in to local storage, we stringify it, and when it comes out, we parse it. And this is what allows us to then leverage this local storage for our particular needs. Now, the reason I've done this video is that what we're about to do next, if you don't have this concept down of why we're doing what we're doing, it's going to get a little lost in the code. So my goal here is just to give you some context. And let's make sure, okay, we did that one. So the last one we're going to do here is just say, okay, we're just going to learn about. Uh-oh, what happened? Did I copy that? Okay. Oh, I just got rid of my here. Okay. So I want you, and we'll just do this. Okay, so let's just go ahead and I'm going to do control/. That way all this is commented out, but it'll be in your commit for this one, which is, and actually this should just be learning about local storage. We implemented. Okay, so actually we implemented local storage. Actually, I'm going to change this one. This will be learning about local storage. So by the time you get here, we will have a different commit. Now, so I want you to research, like, what are the most common uses of local storage? Because we're not using it in the most common way it's used, but we're using it to persist data. So also understanding persistent versus in-memory data. And why is this important when learning CRUD operations? Remember, the whole reason we're doing this is for our data to hang out so we can do updates and deletes and reads, okay, from a persistent source. And then also naming conventions. So we talked about snake case today and why snake case is just another naming convention. But in this case, why are we using this particular one? But naming conventions in programming are just really important. Okay, your commit again is learning about local storage, and then we'll continue, and now we'll actually implement this into our code.